To keep this presentation a little bit informal, sorry, to you guys. When Ken sent out an email he sent out an email to us seniors, sorry Ken, you're spilling the secret, but he said, I think you seniors definitely have a lot to say and pass on to your juniors. And so, at first, I didn't necessarily have anything to pass on, because I thought that my first presentation was enough advice to keep you guys going. But I ran into a story recently that definitely got me thinking about one of our 8 leadership facilitator traits. I know that we didn't go through it very well, not very well, but very often, nor do we bring it up very often in our things. But it's one word that I've always strived to attain, which is objectivity. So to start off, I want to tell you a little story. It's actually recently in the news. I'm not sure whether or not you guys know what's going on in Cambodia, but not many people do. So recently, Cambodia right now is in a current state, or was in a current state, in which the textile factory workers were under protest, and it's the usual case of minimum wage. And so they were protesting for higher wages. So one of the primary people of Cambodia, Hun Sen, is the Prime Minister of Cambodia, and he's been in there since after the Khmer Rouge, which was probably one of the worst times that Cambodia has ever experienced. Now, Hun Sen is a prime minister, but some people actually also call him a dictator because of how long he's ruled. And some of the more or less sketchy things he's known to have done, such as his killing off his political rivals, or hurting them or threatening them. And so these textile workers are really unhappy with Hun Sen and the way that they've been treating factory conditions and minimum wage. Textile, or making clothes, is probably Cambodia's biggest profit margin. If you look at, Tim Giedel came up to me the other day and pointed at his shoes and said, "Thanks for making these." So, Cambodia is really prominent in the clothing textile industries. And so, their major complaint was that if we're making so much money, why can't you raise this minimum wage? There's another political person that's running against him, Sam Rainsy. They had a debate in, I think, it was June or July, and he lost. I think he only got 45%, which was almost enough to beat him, but not enough. And there's still allegations about this, as into what Hun Sen did to potentially rig the votes, and whether or not he actually won fairly or not. Obviously, these textile workers are under the impression that he did. Well, Sam has made a proposal. He wants a re-election. But more than that, he wants the people to believe or to understand that if he were to be elected, he would meet their minimum wage requirements. And so let me just tell you, Cambodia's minimum wage was $80 a month. And for some of you who can imagine that, that's not a lot at all. That's probably what some of you may spend on a Christmas shopping spree. But I guess it's more manageable because things are cheaper in Cambodia. But still, $80 a month is very little. And what they want to raise it to is $160 a month. And so for those in business, I guess in the real world, or to these textile factory workers, they're like, well, you're just raising it $80. That's not a big deal for someone who's for a company or a factory that's making billions and billions of dollars each year. But because these textile factory workers are uneducated, they fail to see that $80 a month to $160 a month is a 100% increase in wages, which is kind of ridiculous for anything. If you imagine a company going from raising all of their workers, and a very large majority of Cambodia are textile factory workers, or just factory workers in general. And so raising those profits by 100%, or those wages by 100%, you could see the detrimental impact that it would have on these companies, right? However, these workers fail to understand that because they want more support and more like stability in their wages, their families. And so what Hun San did was he made a proposal. Right now, I can raise your minimum wage to $95. And that'll be, and over the course of the next 5 years, it will build up to $160, which is not bad, right? So within the next 5 years, you double your minimum wages. But Sam has said, if you elect me as prime minister, I will definitely raise it to $160. And so there's a lot of support for him in going into that. And so the other day, I ran into a blog, and it was something titled, The Story of My Country, or This is What My Country is Like. And it started off with, this is Cambodia. This is a beautiful place. It's known as one of the greatest places, or best places on earth, because of its beauty, its people, and its food. And so I kept reading down, and all of a sudden, this blog article started bashing on Hun Sen. And we don't know the extent of his, I guess, corruption, but one can imagine. And so when you're writing a blog article, it was very clear that she was biased against Hun Sen and for Sam. And so she wrote things like Hun Sen was also part of the Khmer Rouge, and he took part of it. So it shows that he was meaner than like the girls in Mean Girls. And she also said, however, Sam devoted his entire life to Cambodia, and he's only like interested in the good of the people. And so someone reading that and not knowing anything about Cambodia might think, wow, this Hun Sen guy's super bad. Why do you even have him? What a dictator. And they might praise Sam all the way up to, I don't know, Kalana level. But it's interesting. I kind of got a little upset about that because I knew that this blog article would be shared by several Cambodians, and this blog article would certainly convince them that Hun Sen was the worst person ever. And so I thought about that, and I looked at her style of writing. I thought it was really, really neat. Even though I was kind of annoyed that it was very clear that she was being biased, I found it interesting how a blog writer could get so many posts just from the way that she was writing. Even though she said some really harsh things about Hun Sen, she didn't make it so that he was like, oh, he's crazy, like jerk face. We should all hate him. He should like burn wherever, right? She had a very good way of writing and convincing that Sam was the better man, even though not all of the events or ideal situations might have been known. And so, it led me thinking, do you guys remember like Coney and stuff like that? Where Coney made a video and he basically was like, oh, Coney's such a bad guy and all this stuff, and they kind of over-exaggerated all the things that he did. Nevertheless, it went viral and everyone was like anti-Coney for all of 2012. Until people were like, well, wait a minute, what about this, what about this? And they started making clarifications. And so people started getting to know, like, I guess, gathering more information about who Coney was and actually what he did. And so I thought that this type of leadership was interesting because it's prevalent wherever we go, where I guess it's something that we'll definitely see later on in our lives, where people use words and ideas, thoughts, events, opinions to convince a group of people to follow their opinions, even though that group of people doesn't necessarily know the full story. People didn't know the full story to Coney, and so they kind of just were one-sided and stayed not objective at all. And so, but if you can put this into a closer perspective, as into how much this influence our like peers can put towards us, I guess this type of scenario is becomes more prevalent. You guys have all had that situation where one of your best friends or one of your closest friends tells you a side of the story, and all of a sudden you get really pissed at whoever they're pissed at, right? But then maybe a few days later or whatever, you start talking to the other person that they were pissed at, and then they're like, whoa, it's really different on both sides of the story. And as soon as you heard that other side of the story, you're like, whoa, I really judged you wrong. And I definitely have an open mind to the situation again. So the next time someone brings up that situation, hating on that person, you're like, whoa, that person definitely had his reasons to do whatever, right? And I guess I recently watched, not recently, but I watched a TED Talk on this, actually, on the influence of your friends, your peers, and how they can influence your judgments. And so what he talked about in this TED Talk, I think Arjun and Kent might be familiar with it, but let's say you're going to buy a TV, and you made all these plans to buy, I don't know, you researched, you looked online, you looked at reviews, you looked at whatever, TED, like ratings and all this stuff, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna buy this TV because it's got a great price, it's a good brand, it's got good quality, I've looked through all the things. And then you go to your tech person, and you tell your tech person all these reasons as to why you're going to buy this TV. Like, this is awesome, like, it's great quality picture, the great price, great brand, whatever. And your tech person looks at you, and he's like, no, Sony's better, buy the Sony. All of a sudden, you'll do, or two thoughts will definitely run into your mind. The first thought is, whoa, like, is he right? And so you'll go back home and you'll research all over again. You'll look at the ratings again on different websites, you'll look at other customer reviews, you'll look at the bad reviews, look at the good reviews, and then you also look at the TV that your friend recommended and compare the two. And then you spend a lot more time researching, and then after that, you make the decision based upon, I guess, your research. Or you can go with the second option, which is you completely disregard all your research and listen to your friend, because he's the smart adult. And that was really interesting. And I guess the key differences between that, or how I like to distinguish these two types of audience, is the listener and the one with knowledge. And I just want to encourage you to always try to be the one with knowledge before you try to be the one with judgments, or you try to be the one to make judgments. If you were at the other end, if you were the listener, I can actually tell you another story, and I'll tell you how it felt like. We were at Rush the other day, and we were looking at cadavers, and I'm not sure whether or not you guys were familiar with cadavers, like dead bodies, right? And so we were looking at different dead bodies because there's lines of them, and there's one cadaver where it's just his legs, and there's an MD PhD student there, and he's talking to a couple of students. And then we're at a different cadaver, and the manager of the lab is talking to us, and he's like, well, this is the tibia. And so we see the MD PhD student walking over. He's like, well, this is the tibia. It's one of the only bones. And then the manager stops him. He's like, dude, he's lying. And then the manager keeps talking. Oh, sorry, the MD PhD stops him. But the manager keeps talking because he doesn't hear him. So the tibia is one of the only bones that isn't really surrounded by muscle. And then the MD PhD student says it again. Dude, he's lying to you. This is all lies. And then the manager's like, wait, what? I'm lying to them? And he's like, yeah, of course you are. And he's like, right. I'm making this all up on the spot. And the MD PhD student is like, and the worst thing, like the best thing about that is, they actually believe you. Like, I was over there on the other side of the leg, and I pointed to one of the leg's strings, and I told them that this was cancer. And they totally believed it. And so, you know that if you were very familiar with anatomy, and someone said, yo, this is cancer, you would have been like, get out of my house, right? But as a listener, as someone who is uneducated, as someone who does not necessarily know the complete story, you're susceptible to these kinds of things. When you're at SIR, or when you're at Imsoloquium giving your SIR presentation, and it's a science presentation, and the people outside in the crowd are just regular people. You're like, it's fine. If I mess up on information or something like that, they won't never know. And so you feel more comfortable about it. But if all of a sudden you're presenting to a bunch of lab members, you're like, oh crap. Like, they know what they're talking about way more than I do, and so I can't say something illegitimate and get away with it. It's the difference between being a listener and being a knower. And so, I want you to consider the whole perspective of things. I'm not saying to go out back and doubt everything that everyone's ever told you, but I want you not to be persuaded by the crowd of others, that are being persuaded by mere words of others. I want you to make sure that you know your stuff, you find out knowledge, and you make an opinion based upon your own beliefs and your own decisions. I don't want you to make it based upon the simple opinion of others or just because everyone else is doing it. Knowledge is powerful. Thanks.